So the core issue that most organizations are struggling with is simply there's a lot to do, right? I'd say more than ever, which is kind of corny, but it's simply the truth. You're likely working on some sort of major architecture refactor. You're trying to release, the next big best of breed, cloud application. You're probably adopting new internal technologies yourself. There's just a ton to do. And the question becomes like, well, how does your work on notifications either combine with that, assist with that, or we would say probably detract from that in some ways. So the way that I say that it's detractors, because notifications again have grown in the shadows without a ton of oversight, right? And this is what I was talking about earlier, where today it's like every feature or every product just needs notifications. That's the way it is. So because they're table stakes, they've exploded with either the number of components you have in your application or the applications yourself. Again, relatively easy things to set up initially. So you have all of these disconnected teams, depending on your company, spread across different geographies and projects that are creating these notifications in silos. The complexity and the disconnection only increases when you start to pull in things like, okay, email isn't enough, we want SMS and we want push. And then on top of that, you have, okay, well, we need to provide some better features here because users are demanding it. They need to be able to select from a rich choice of preferences, including things like when they want the notification delivered to them, et cetera, et cetera. So it begins to build and build and build. And then again, all this culminates in this really inefficient collaboration where you're going back and forth on, improving or creating a single notification. And then all combined, it's like you don't even know what exists out there today. So it's impossible to have any cohesive strategy when it comes to notifications themselves. So we refer to this internally as notification chaos, right? And at the end of the day, what it is it's just a really friction-rich environment between not only product and engineering, but really between the applications themselves, because they have these notifications that were built by different teams under different methodologies, crammed into one single space. They're really expensive to maintain, and they're really brittle, right? So going back to kind of what we talked about briefly earlier is this concept of I'm putting out this product or this feature, I have to have notifications. Everyone's expecting it. So, okay, I just build it, right? And it's fairly easy to stand up a simple email or even add email and SMS. The problem that we see a lot of companies and teams run into is really this. So once you have this culmination of not only different types of channels, but also the different requirements, which are preferences or some sort of localization type objective, it becomes too much. And you start looking at options for either rebuilding the whole thing under a unified system, or quite often looking for solutions like Novu. So to put a bow around it, you come to this decision where it's, do we treat our notifications as just this thing that we have to have because everyone wants it? Or do we invest a lot in it, which ultimately means, let's be frank here, right? Notifications are not the core aim of most companies, right? They're the core aim of Novu, but for most companies, you are not a notification product, right? Notifications are ancillary to your product. They are a feature. So you have to divert and distract your engineering effort away from cool new things that you could be building into your app itself, right? So the way this kind of crystallizes for a lot of the companies we talk to is you don't choose to build, unless you're very unique, your own billing system or your own customer data platform or authentication. You choose from what's already out there, right? There are great companies that have already done this. And we look at Novu in the same way. So why build Stripe when it already exists? Why build a notification platform when Novu exists? So I think this is, as we start to talk about the new release and Novu in 2024, this is where it starts to become extremely interesting. And why that is before this release, you've really only had two options. Option one is, I'm going to build this whole thing myself. I'm going to DIY it. I'm going to set it aside at, a couple engineers or an engineering team, and we're going to build out our own notification framework and platform. The other option is there are other vendors. Novu isn't alone. I mean, this is a big problem that most of you are struggling with. So there are other off-the-shelf solutions that you can adopt, right? When we go back to the do-it-yourself approach, the benefits to that are awesome, right? You have total flexibility, as you would expect, because you're building each component yourself. And in the same vein, you can interact with all of your local data, all of your systems that sit inside of your domain, again, because you own this thing, you're building it. The downsides to this approach are kind of the same, right? You're building the thing. So as we talked about, you're going to need an engineering team to do it. Typically, it's not going to satisfy the less technical users that might be involved in the process, creating that friction we talked about earlier. And then you have to maintain this thing. And I think, that's software dev 101 of like, the maintenance usually ends up taking you way more time and being more of a headache than building the product itself. Then you look at the off-the-shelf or commercially available solutions. Benefits to that are really easy to use for non-technical personas. Most of them have been built specifically, spun out of like a marketing automation tool almost. You're going to have all the features that you need because, again, you have a company building this thing for you. And you're going to have relatively, both low infrastructure requirements because they're hosted, and you're not going to have to build a ton of things yourself. The downsides to that are, what you see is what you're going to get. This was built for essentially everyone, which almost means it was built for no one specific. It's not going to fit your company or your use cases one-to-one. You're going to have to make some trade-offs. And then you really don't have a solution that fits within either role. It's not going to be 100%, non or less technical. It's, of course, not going to be 100% dev. Everyone is going to have some sort of friction point in using it. What's interesting, and we think extremely revolutionary, even if you will, about this new release with Novu is we're actually sitting somewhere in the middle. And that's a lot of what this code first approach allows. You maintain the flexibility that you get with the DIY solution and the ability to interact and hydrate local data, because the code for your notifications is going to live inside of your environment, inside of your existing code base. But ultimately, what you're creating, what the product is allowing, is this, web studio, which you'll see in a moment. That's, very slick and usable by someone who just needs to go in and, modify a notification or view the impact or progress of them. And then, of course, as you'd expect, we're building all the features for you. You don't have to worry about that. Like, that is our core competency alongside the infrastructure. You don't have to worry about scale. You don't have to worry about setting up queuing systems and things like that to make sure that you're performant and scalable. Those are things that we handle for you. So this is what we're really excited about, and frankly, we almost wish we did it earlier, but it's still kind of a head scratcher that others haven't taken this approach yet. So
yeah, definitely want to show you a little bit about what Ryan just talked through. Really sort of narrowing in on the concept of this hybrid approach to having both an engineering focus, but also enabling product and other non-engineering resources to utilize a solution. So as Ryan mentioned, we have this amazing, what we call our local studio. This studio is able to be presented based off of how what we call workflows are architected from a engineering perspective. So those workflows will be built out in your code base. And this is actually a Express web application server, or excuse me, Next.js web application server use case here, but we support other similar frameworks like Express, Remix, Svelte. So it's really just building this like sort of static, but also interactive dev studio that people can interact with based off of how those workflows are architected from an engineering perspective. So you'll see across the left here, I have 4 different sort of use cases. Each workflow has what we call steps that are associated with it. Steps can be channels, they can be an email, they can be a push, an SMS, an in-app notification. And then steps also include what we call action items as well. So it can be a digest or a delay too. So in this use case, I'll show here, we have an email template. So this email exists in your code base, and I'll jump to the code side of things here shortly. But this email is scaffolded. It's the structure of it is built out in your code base. And as you see here on the left, or excuse me, on the right, these step controls, these are the values, the interactive data that product and other non-engineering folks can interact with. So just sort of imagine a scenario where you've templated an email, maybe has a couple different logos that you want to interact with. In this case, from an engineering perspective, I've exposed those logos that have been approved. I can toggle between those and sort of choose if that makes sense to me. I can interact with the text as well in real time. This is being rendered on the Express side, and then the return of that is this compiled HTML in this case for the email use cases. In addition to this, I can, a lot of emails are going to have buttons. They may have dividers. They may have sections that are included as well. I can choose to either expose that button or to keep it hidden. I can influence what the text of that button is. So it's really up to you to define what those inputs or what those controls are going to look like and how you can interact with them in this Dev Studio experience. So as I had mentioned earlier as well, there are these non-channel steps too. So with a delay, maybe I want to send sort of like a weekly email. You can also expose those controls too. So if at any point in time you want to update the frequency of this, you have that full flexibility and functionality to do that. And so this isn't just geared towards, emails as the main sort of channel. We also have, the push notifications that are here too, that you can just the same way you can interact with those step controls, the SMS too. So it's really that full suite end-to-end um, workflow building that you can do from a programmatic perspective, expose that on the front end through this studio experience. And then once the studio is, once you're happy with what it looks like in there, we do have a synchronization process from your local instance or from a hosted application that you have running, pushing to the Novu cloud itself. So that's many different use cases. It's really easy to build these out. I will sort of briefly walk through what some of that code setup looks like, and then we can sort of take it from there. Yeah, as one of the first use cases I showed was an email template. From a programmatic perspective, this use case is a React email use case. So you'll see that I'm importing these React email components. So just sort of like imagine that you're already using, it doesn't have to be React email, it can be MGM or MJM, it can be any other email sort of generator that you use internally. Really the only thing that I'm doing from like a new code perspective is introducing, in this case with the React, it's these different sort of props that are defining what the controls are. And so I already have the React email HTML set up here. And really all I'm doing is exposing those control props within the code itself. And so that I know that these are going to be fields that I'm exposing to the end users in the studio experience so that they can add whatever relevant content needs to be there. And so really all I'm doing at that point is exporting this rendered HTML as a function and ultimately bringing it into what we call that workflow. So the workflows that I showed you across the left-hand side of the studio, this is where you're going to define how those workflows are set up. So at the top here, you'll see we do have this Novu SDK, this framework SDK, where you're going to import the workflow. The workflow is that defined function that we have that essentially allows you to build out the different steps that are associated with it. So remember, I showed the channel type steps with email, SMS, push, etc. And then also you can use those action type steps with digest and delay. So in this case, everything's running async here. I'm passing in the step, but also payload as well, because all notification or you can enable payloads to be sent with those workflow events. So in this case, I have a delay that's set up here. I define the name of that delay. In this case, I want to expose those controls that I've defined to be editable values within that delay. And then same goes for email, similar function structure, but in this case, I'm returning a subject as well as the body. And so the body is that previous file email that I had showed, that is that exported rendered function, and then the controls as well as the payload that we defined there too. And so from a control perspective, and as well as the payloads, we are able to define those through either a JSON schema or through Zod. So those are two schemas that we're currently interacting with. Both are supported. Zod would be an approach where like type safety is very critical to you, to where you would define those different schemas within a separate file and then import those constants as you see fit for type safety. But you can also, as you see here, I have this more of the JSON schema, which is actually those properties defined within the confines of that workflow as well. And so the great thing about this is that I as an engineer, I'm not worrying about having to input like hard coded text. I'm not having to worry about making sure that I input the correct, header image into the email template. I'm not worrying about like what the exact verbiage is that I had to use for an SMS push. Really, all I'm doing is building that scaffolding of what the workflow templates and channels need to be, and then from there, allowing the the people that are really going to be involved with making sure the end delivery is the way that it needs to look. Those are going to be the ones that are interacting with the studio experience to make sure that everything is set up correctly. And so in the event, like, I don't have to have that back and forth with engineering to, hey, I need you to update this text, or I need you to do any sort of other code change, which would then have to go through version control approvals, push to through your SDLC. So it's really enabling that effective collaboration between the two parties without overwhelming either one.